This video is sponsored by Audible. Homer Simpson is arguably the most iconic character in history. The big guy has literally done it all and has had every job imaginable.
Boxer, mascot, astronaut, imitation crusty, baby proofer, trucker, hippie, plow driver, food critic, conceptual artist, grease salesman, carny, mayor, grifter.
So in this video, I'm gonna chart his entire life from his birth to his many deaths. So if you want to know how he went from being cloned to becoming a robot, then stick around to find out.
Kids are so afraid of being terminated.
This is the complete Homer Simpson timeline. As I discussed in my Bart Simpson video, The Simpsons exists in a floating timeline, meaning that Homer can be a teenager in the 70s as well as the 90s. So because of this, I'll be going through his life by age and not specific dates. And yes, before anyone says that the future episodes aren't really considered canon, but you know what? It's fun to put his entire life in order. So with that being said, let's get started. Homer's birth. Homer J was born to Mona and Abraham Simpson, and according to Abe, Homer was an accident.
You were an accident!
Which is a running theme throughout these timeline videos, as Homer said the exact same thing about Bart.
But when I do it, it's cute!
One of Homer's greatest loves, apart from beer and TV, is of course food. And this is pretty evident right away when we see baby Homer chowing down on some pizza.
How'd he get that?
I guess it would have been pretty inappropriate to see him drinking beer at this point. Age 6, crayon in his brain. Homer hasn't always been the sharpest tool in the shed, to say the least.
Everyone is stupid except me.
But there is a reason for this. At 6 years old, Homer shoves 16 crayons up his nose. And he sneezes out most of them, but one crayon still remains lodged in his brain. This had a serious impact on his intelligence, explaining why he did so bad in school and in life. However, a few years later on when he's an adult, he gets the crayon removed and is shown to be pretty smart. He even comes up with a formula that proves that there is no God, but when he starts to feel a bit ostracized from his friends and family, he gets the crayon inserted back into his brain. Age 9, Mummy the Abandoner, Daddy the Dream Crusher. As seen in flashbacks, Mona is a loving mother to little Homie and cared for him deeply. However, she expressed her entrapment of being in a loveless relationship with Abe. But when she sees a football player with some lovely long locks, she is awakened and the power of free love ignites a fire. She soon joins a group of hippies who are protesting against Mr. Burns' germ warfare laboratory. And after setting off an antibiotic bomb in protest, the hippies flee, running over Mr. Burns. And Mona was the only one to stay behind to make sure Monty was okay, but instead of thanking her, he vowed revenge, forcing her to leave her son and go into hiding. This abandonment of Homer, leaving him with a cold, distant father without any tender care, had a severe impact on him. Abe was the complete opposite to Mona, readily there to crush any of Homer's dreams. And one poignant example of this is when Homer expresses his ambition to become president someday, but Abe quickly extinguished any presidential hopes by eloquently stating,
"Quit your daydreaming, melonhead!"
thus explaining why Homer is so ready to dump his father at the retirement home later on and hardly ever visits him. Homer's estranged relationship with Abe will be a running theme throughout his entire life, and in many ways mirrors his own relationship with Bart. Age 10, Homer meets his soulmate. Homer is sent off to a summer camp for underprivileged boys, but it's not all bad. There he meets his lifelong friends Lenny, Carl and Moe for the first time. But instead of doing fun activities like kayaking, they're instead forced to wash dishes for a girls' camp across the lake. While cleaning trays, someone accidentally drops their retainer down the chute, revealing that someone to be Marge Simpson, but at that time Marge Bouvier, who is also at the summer camp. And although they don't see each other through the flaps, the two instantly hit it off. When Marge asks Homer for his name, her friends joke that the boy probably has a really horrible name like Homer, so he quickly changes it to say Elvis.
Elvis Jagger Abdul-Jabbar.
And swept up in the mysterious magic of love, they plan to meet that night. But after Homer accidentally stabs himself in the eye with a switchblade, he is forced to wear an eye patch. Meanwhile, Marge burns her hair while straightening it with an iron. So the two turn up looking completely different. and they don't actually discover that they met this age until many years later. The two share their first ever kiss and fall for each other. And they plan to meet the next day, but on his way back to camp, Homer falls off a cliff and into the lake. The next morning, he washes up in a fat camp and imprisoned. And with no way to get back to her, Marge believes that Homer has abandoned her. Decades later, they discover that they were each other's first kiss and that they kept the two halves of a heart-shaped stone for decades. This episode goes to show that the two were always destined to be together and that they are each other's first and only love. Age 12, the Blondie years. At 12 years old, we see Homer, Lenny and Carl are the best of friends since leaving camp. While hiking, they are threatened by a young fat Tony and his cronies, but Mo saves the day with his air rifle.
18 more pumps, that could break the skin.
The gang go to an old quarry and Homer jumps in, but is shocked to find that he lands in a puddle. He loosens a blockage in the pipe and causes the water to gush out, and when he looks down, he is horrified to find a rotting corpse on top of him. And he proceeds to scream, and this causes a long-lasting effect on Homer, which is later reawakened by a hypnotist. And if you're interested, we later find out that the corpse was Waylon Smithers Sr., who died saving the town from an imminent nuclear meltdown. By the way, if you're enjoying the video, then I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe to the Simpsons Theory. Only 11% of you who watch my videos are actually subscribed to the channel. And it may not seem like a big deal, but when you click subscribe, it lets YouTube know that you like the videos and recommends my channel to more and more people. So thank you. Now back to the video. Age 15, do pizza bots dream of electric guitars? Homer is working at a Chuck E. Cheese style restaurant called Razzle Dazzle's Pizza-tainment Palace. When one of the animatronics breaks down, Homer jumps on stage to do an improv hip-hop song behind the machine, and the crowd lap it up, and so Homer gets a new job doing music for animatronics. This episode is another example of Abe being an unsupportive father. When Homer brings up his musical ambitions, Abe simply says,
"You're wasting your life."
Much later on, Abe finally admits that his parenting wasn't the best and realizes that he really should have encouraged his son's talents instead of trying to suppress them.
"I never listened to you. Said your dreams were ridiculous."
But as we'll see later on, Homer goes on to have a very varied and hugely successful music career. That suggests that his father's constant criticism forced Homer to work harder in order to prove him wrong. Aged 18, the way we was. Now a high school senior, Homer is sent to detention for smoking, and it's here that he lies eyes on Marjorie Bouvier, with both of them not realizing that they actually met a few years earlier. As children, Homer is instantly smitten by the blue-haired beauty. Later on, Homer plucks up the courage to ask Marge to prom, but she politely turns him down. But not one for giving up, he instead asks her to tutor him in French. And when she comes round, they hit it off, and Marge agrees to go to prom with him. But his romantic ambitions are shattered when he comes clean about pretending to need French lessons, getting a good old slap. And I don't know if it was the crayons or what, but he is pretty naive and oblivious, and he still believes he's got a date with Marge to the prom. She, however, agrees to go to prom with Artie Ziff, resulting in poor Homie going to prom alone. At the prom, Marge and Homer share a quiet moment together, and he confesses that he really can't get her out of his head.
"How could the only thing I've ever been sure about in my life be wrong?"
Later on, Artie gets a bit too handy, tearing at Marge's dress, and he receives a well-deserved slap. As Homer walks alone in the road, Marge picks him up and reveals that she should have gone to prom with him. And in a really tender, sweet moment, Homer fixes Marge's torn dress with his corsage. Despite the many obstacles in their long relationship, Homer and Marge's genuine connection is the bedrock of the show. They are meant to be together, and as proved time and time again, they are ultimate soulmates.
Soulmate.
Age 21, that 90s show. Homer and Marge are now living together in an apartment. When Marge gets accepted into college, Homer has to work for his father's laser tag business in order to pay for her tuition.
Oh! This counts as your break.
But when Marge starts college, she falls for her professor, ditching poor Homer, which is super harsh. Broken-hearted, Homer forms a grunge band called Sadgasm. The group become insanely popular, and they even inspire Kurt Cobain to create Nirvana. Who knew?
You know that new sound you're looking for? Well, listen to this.
Marge eventually realizes that her professor is a giant tool and dumps him, admits her mistake to Homer, and they get back together. Homer has always had a passion for music and will experiment with lots of different genres throughout his life. And he's of course always successful at it, whether it's grunge, metal, opera, or, as we'll talk about later, Barbershop Quartet. This musical talent harks back to his humble beginnings as a choir boy.
Hi. Hey, my voice just changed.
Age 28, I Married Marge. After getting hot and heavy watching The Empire Strikes Back, Marge and Homer get frisky inside a golf course castle. This night of passionate putt-putt results in pregnancy.
No! 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 No!
Poor guy.
And wanting to do the right thing, Homer pops the question, which Marge happily accepts. With no money for a big wedding, they marry in Shotgun Pete's wedding chapel. And their wedding reception is less than spectacular, spending it at a truck stop. And Homer then buys a wedding cake that reads "to a well of a wife." Not the best way to start a marriage. However, Homer does make it up to Marge eventually in later life with a second wedding, surrounded by their friends and family. Wanting to support his new family, Homer applies for any job he can get. He first gets hired and fired from old Springfield.
You've ruined our vacation.
But after Repo Man repossesses Marge's wedding ring, this was the final straw, and Homer bursts into Mr. Burns' office and demands a job. Homer's trait of ultimately wanting to do the best for his family is a really honourable one that transpires throughout his life. And a few moments later on, he rushes to the hospital just in time to watch Bart be born. And what does the little tyke do? He immediately sets Homer's tie on fire.
He did that on purpose.
How could he? He's only 10 minutes old.
Age 34, Homer's Barbershop Quartet. As seen earlier, with his interest in hip-hop and grunge, Homer is a natural-born musician. He is now in a barbershop quartet with Principal Skinner, Barney, Apu, and not Chief Wiggum. And apart from Homer and Barney, this is a group of Springfieldians you wouldn't ordinarily see hanging out together, so it was pretty fun seeing that. After their smash hit Baby on Board becomes mainstream, the band are catapulted into stardom. They travel the world collecting Grammys as they go. But their time in the spotlight soon fades as they give way to in-band politics, member changes and fights until the band soon splits up. At the end of the episode, the band get back together for one last time to perform on top of Moe's Bart in a pretty cool moment, turtlenecks and all. Despite his big success, Homer really misses his family and could care less about the awards and would rather be back at home. Age 37, and Maggie makes 3. When Homer receives a paycheck clearing him of all of his debts, he quits his job at the power plant in spectacular fashion.
That's for employing me for 8 years.
He then starts his dream job at the bowling alley and loves his carefree lifestyle. But after some snuggle time, Marge gets pregnant again and he realizes his bowling salary won't cover 3 kids. So Homer quits his job at the bowling alley and comes crawling back to Mr. Burns, quite literally. Although Homer isn't the best parent in the world, he always comes through for his family in the end, abandoning his own happiness for the sake of his loved ones. He leaves the best job he ever had to a soul-destroying dead-end job just to provide for his family. We see this again and again, like when he left his amazing life working for Hank Scorpio because his family simply didn't like Cypress Creek. At the end of the day, Homer will always do what's best for his family and not just himself. Age 39, the very long year. Homer has crammed a whole lot in 1 year, from going into space to climbing a 20,000-foot mountain. So I could go through all of the many crazy things this guy did before he turned 40, but that itself would take over 30 years to go through, so let's just mosey on. Age 40, send in the clones. After Marge pleads with Homie to stop his gluttonous way and take better care of himself, he vows to make a change and starts by walking up the stairs, 2 steps at a time. But the overexertion causes him to have a heart attack, falling down the stairs and dying. We cut to a funeral for him at the church, but before being cremated, Professor Frank bursts in and announces that he's made a clone of Homer.
Homer is not dead! I have made a copy!
But the new clone doesn't last for long, dying the very next day after consuming too much potato salad, and so cloned once again and again and again. While cloning might seem very outlandish, cloning has been a very real thing in Springfield for a long time. We have seen Mr. Burns' clones many times throughout the show in regular episodes. Even Mo has some.
Hey, I'm not the clone, you're the clone.
Age 46, future drama. Homer and Marge are now separated for the 100th time, but are still bickering. It turns out that Marge divorced Homer after he blew their entire life savings on an underwater home. He is of course still in love with her, but she is now dating Krusty the Clown, who Homer proceeds to strangle, and it seems that Marge has a real type. Now, if you don't get this joke, this is referring to the original plan that Krusty was actually going to be Homer all along, just dressed up to build a connection with Bart, and by the end of the series, Homer would then reveal himself to be Krusty the Clown. This is why, besides the obvious clown attire, they look identical. Anyway, Marge ditches the clown and gets back with Hobie, and she even changes her mind about the underwater house. Age 54, Lisa's wedding. While studying at college, Lisa meets a dashing English chap named Hugh. After a small rivalry, they quickly fall in love. Before long, he pops the question and asks her to marry him. But Lisa is worried about him meeting her family, who are a little rough around the edges. Speaking of which, at dinner, Hugh is shocked by their table manners, and Homer demands that he pulls his finger.
I said pull my finger.
Despite his boorish ways, Homer does attempt to make Hugh feel at home by driving on the left-hand side of the road and gifts Hugh with a set of pig cufflinks that he wants him to wear for his wedding day. On the wedding day, Homer talks to Lisa about how important she is to him.
You're my greatest accomplishment and you did it all yourself.
When Lisa notices that Homer has the cufflinks, she goes and gives them to Hugh. But when he begrudgingly accepts them, he says that they will never see her family again. Outraged, Lisa says that despite complaining about them, she ultimately loves her family. And that she can't marry someone who doesn't understand that, calling the entire wedding off. Homer and Lisa have always had a really special bond in the show, despite being completely different from each other and not sharing many interests. But Homer's always tried to be a very supportive father to Lisa. He was the only one to believe her about Jebediah Springfield, took a second job to support Lisa's pony, sold his beloved Duff Blimp ticket so she could enter a beauty pageant, and he brought Lisa her very first saxophone. Age 59, death. Again. When exiting a food bank, Homer is gunned by the police, mistaking his sub sandwich for a gun. Although this appears to be the end of the big guy, let us not forget about his many clones, always there to save a storyline. 69, holidays or future past. Homer has done the unthinkable and has given up drinking cold turkey, and he now spends his days making ships inside bottles.
I'd smash him all for one lousy beer.
A bit later on, Bart comes around with his two sons, Jiff and Skippy, and after Bart finds out that his ex-wife has remarried, Bart asks his father to look after the two boys, which Homer is only too happy to. In the episode, Homer is shown to be a really fantastic grandpa, and you can tell he really loves spending time with his grandkids. He even helps the divide between Bart and his two kids by explaining that they should really give him a second chance. In his later years, Homer seems to have learned from his many parenting mistakes with Bart. Homer and his son have always had a really rocky relationship, what with strangling the boy with every chance he got. But we can see Homer's consistent growth through the way he sticks up for Bart in convincing his grandchildren to give their father a second chance. Age 70, Days of Future. Homer is once again dead for the 100th time, but this time Frank announces that he is no longer able to bring him back after using up all of his clones.
Oh, you used up all your clones, you fat, reckless fat pig.
Instead, he was able to download Homer's brain onto a flash drive. Homer now exists as a floating dismembered head on a TV screen. And after decades of wifely obedience, Marge is finally at her wit's end, kicking Homer out of the house. But Homer isn't just confined to a TV screen, as he is sent a robot body so he can become mobile. A nice touch throughout these episodes is that it shows Homer still being a really great grandfather, letting them chase him around the house, babysitting, and even letting them hit him with baseball bats.
Yeah, open your stance a little there. Oh, yeah, that's it.
Aww. At the end of the episode, Homer is now an advanced golden robot, and him and Marge have finally reconciled.
That's a bit of a woohoo, indeed.
79. Father and son healing. In a strange turn of events or heightened technology, Homer somehow got his body back. Maybe Frank found some more clones after all. Bart has finally got his act together and now holds one of the highest jobs in the United States.
1 senior citizen and 1 Chief Justice of the Supreme Court.
I love that Homer and Bart have finally reconciled after their long turbulent relationship. Homer always feared about Bart's future, but I think this is a fear mirrored in his own insecurities, of his fear of not making anything of his life. And so feared Bart would end up the same way. After years of questionable parenting, you can see that Homer's ultimate goal really was quite a naively loving one. Finally, I'd like to thank Audible for sponsoring this video. I work a full-time job, and in my limited spare time, I write and edit for my YouTube channel, so I don't always have the time to sit down and read as much as I want to. But with Audible, I can listen to audiobooks while I'm working and editing videos. And at the moment, I'm currently listening to 100 Things the Simpsons fans should know and do before they die by Ali Gertz and Julia Prescott. It's a really fun book and a must-have for any Simpsons fans. It's packed full of fun Simpsons trivia that have really been useful for creating these videos. And you know what? You haven't even heard the best part. Audible is giving all you saucy Springfieldians a 30-day free trial. Visit audible.com/Simpsons Theory or text Simpsons Theory to 500 500 to start your free 30-day trial today. Finally, I'd like to say a big thank you to my Flying Hellfish members: Timothy, who else but Zane, Liam, Tommy, Steve, Charlie, Sean, Justin, Andre, Stefan, Jake, David, Nicholas, Vincent, Robert, Ashley, Kevin, Rob, Devin, Gadrak, Bailey, Stephen, Edward, Anthony, Nicola, Ned Centric, Jeffrey, Felix, Stephen, and Mason.